What is up guys, PK here, and in today's video, bows, what are they? What are they good for? How do you use them? How do you get them? What are the best perks? What are the best talents? Is there even a difference? Who knows? In any case.
Headshot.
See that? That guy's dead now. Anyways, now the bow is the one weapon I keep coming back to, with the exception of a short period of time where I played Great Axe Warhammer to level them, another short period playing the Ice Gauntlet and the Fire Staff, and a third short period playing OPR with the musket. I pretty much always come back to the bow. Now the bow is not necessarily the current meta, but I swear to God, you can perform really well in wars with the bow. I'm not saying it's the meta, I'm not saying you should play the bow, but if you enjoy playing it, then this video is for you. And today I want to talk about a couple of things. I want to talk about how to use the bow, I want to talk about my bow build, and then I want to talk a little bit about the best bows in the game. In other words, what are the different legendary bows in the game that you can obtain and how do you actually get them. So with that said, let's get to it. First things first, the build. Now, as with any weapon, you have 6 abilities to choose from. First, you got the evade shot, you got the rain of arrows, and you got the poison shot here on the skirmisher side, and then you have the penetrating shot, the rapid shot, and the splinter shot on the hunter side. Now, you're always going to be going for penetrating shot. That's sort of your bread and butter. It's a high damage ability you saw me use before. Now, this is a great ability for several different reasons. First of all, it's a really fast shot with a high single target damage, but it also deals more damage the more enemies you hit when you have the follow-up perks. Now, then you have abilities such as Splinter Shot, which is unfortunately just really underwhelming. And then you have Rapid Shot. Now, Rapid Shot has the humongous issue of being uncancelable, which means you cannot stop shooting. And that is the biggest problem. You see, if that wasn't the case, then you could make a case for Rapid Shot. But you just have this ginormous problem, whether it's PvP or PvE, that once you activate the ability and you take it, sort of does like a pew, 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 right? And like, it has a really long animation time. And once you take the first shot, if there's a boss that's suddenly charging a spell at you and you get aggro, or maybe there's a Great Axe user in the middle of a war who starts charging you, well, then you're essentially effed. You're fucked. Right? You can't move, you can't stop, you can't cancel it, which is both nonsensical and kind of annoying, and sort of ruins the whole ability, which is why Rapid Shot is unfortunately terrible, because otherwise I thought it was a really nice ability. Then you have Evade Shot. Now the problem with Evade Shot, well, there's a couple. Like, the only case you could make, sort of the only scenario in which you could make a case for it, would be in a 1v1 duel. But even in a 1v1 duel, it's not fantastic, but it would probably perform slightly better than Rain of Arrows, I'll admit that. But that is the only scenario in which it would outperform anything, really. It's really underwhelming as an ability. It's not really that great for escaping either, even though it does, like, it can grant you this little haste, and you can do a little bit of a knockback effect. But all in all, it's not that amazing and super difficult to hit with, and even when you hit it, the effect just isn't that amazing. Then you have Rain of Arrows and your Poison Shot. Now, these two abilities are amazing both for PvP and for PvE. So they're amazing for leveling, first of all, because they're both AoEs, one of them obviously with a poison effect, and the other just being this super long range AoE you can cast. And when you combine them, they're really good for questing with the bow, but also for wars, right? Because they both have long range, large AoEs, so you can deal massive amounts of damage both in wars and in OPR, or even in open world combat. So sure, Rain of Arrows is not fantastic for 1v1s, I'll grant that, but outside of that, these are definitely the abilities you want to go for. On top of that, you have a couple of other perks. You know, this one is really important. 20% damage for 5 seconds after dodging, that's insane. Then the dodge and weave is a bit more of a sort of pick and choose. You don't necessarily need to take this perk, you can switch it out with Battle Precision. Debuff and damage over time durations last 20% longer. I think most people will probably say that Battle Precision is better. I just personally like the slight extra mobility of dodge and weave, in particularly in OPR. But I would say definitely in wars and such, you could make a really good case for Battle Precision. And then you have Mark here, 10% extra damage to foes suffering from a debuff, which also works well together with Battle Precision. And on the right side, you pretty much have everything that deals extra damage. You also have these heavy attacks fly faster. And then you have this one where they deal more damage to targets with full health. You have this one where the arrows travel further before gravity starts pulling them down, which is insanely important. If you want to hit anything more than a few meters away, you need this arrow range. And of course, bullseye, critical hit chance, essentially all the damage ones. You only leave out the Hawkeye, which is kind of useless, and the unbreakable focus, which is also kind of useless. And finally, you have the concussion, which essentially deals 20% more damage on headshots and a 50% chance for you to get your arrow back when you perform a successful headshot. And of course, you leave out knee shot, which is probably the single most underwhelming and terrible final perk in the game. Like, I know of no other perk in the bottom here for any other weapon. Maybe I haven't seen it, but that's as terrible as knee shot. Like, 10% slow. 10% for shooting them in the leg. So you're giving up on all of your headshot damage to shoot them in the leg for a 10% slow. Maybe if it was 30%, it wouldn't be as terrible, but even at 30%, I'd be like, nah, not sure. Like, you gotta go for the legs. I mean, 10%, that's nothing, right? So yeah, that's why you're gonna be going for concussion. So with the build out of the way, let's get moving. Now, before we get to all of the different legendary bows and what perks to look out for, I want to talk a little bit about something that they changed about the bow recently, which has been pissing me off, to be quite frank with you. You see, when you're aiming with the bow, right now I'm just holding down my right mouse button and left clicking, right? So I'm just shooting arrows. If I were to, for example, click Q now, I charge it up, but do you see that? I'm clicking Q, and then I stop clicking Q, right? So I'm clicking Q whilst holding down my aim button, and so if I keep holding down my right mouse button, the ability will stop being charged unless I cast it immediately. Like, you see? It goes back to a normal shot. This used to not be the case. You used to be fully able to hold down your aim button, charge up your ability, and then it stayed on your ability. Right now, you have two options. You either have to let go of your aim button after you do it, or you have to cast it really, really fast, right? And this is actually super frustrating and can be super annoying when you're trying to cast an ability, but you don't want to stop your aim. You want to go straight back to aiming after casting the ability. And so it's just something to be aware of and keep in mind. If you feel like the bow has recently been weird to do abilities with, then that is likely why. So just charge up the ability and let go of the aim button, and that way you can keep it charged, okay? Now let's talk a little bit about perks. Now this is a list of every single perk that you would be able to roll on, for example, an ironwood bow when crafting it. Now there's a bunch of different perks, and all of the different perks in the game have one or two categories ascribed to the perk. And so when you're rolling a specific perk, you cannot then afterwards roll a different perk that contains the same category. In other words, just as an easy example, you cannot craft a bow that has both chain lightning and chain fire, because both of those have the proc category. That is to say that when you hit something, it procs a mechanism, and you can't roll a double proc on the same weapon. But of course, they also each have an elemental category, which is also what prevents you sometimes from putting a specific gem into a weapon. If it already has one of, like, for example, Chain Arcane, then you can't put a fire gem into it, because those two will also conflict. Now, then you have like something like damage category. That's damage to ancients, angry earth, beast, corrupted, lost. You can only have one of those as well. But if we go down here to some of these slightly more interesting ones, the ones I have marked with colors, let's take a look at something like Vicious, for example. Now, Vicious is critical damage and has two different categories. Enchanted, which is light and heavy attacks deal 9.6% more damage, also has one of those categories, which means you cannot have critical damage and light and heavy attacks deal more damage on the same bow. I mean, you can if you find the right bow, but we'll get to that momentarily. But if you're crafting a bow, you cannot roll both of these perks at the same time. You also can't roll both Vicious, which is critical damage, and Vorpal, which is headshot damage, at the same time, because they also have an overlapping category. However, you can roll Vorpal and Enchanted at the same time. So it's kind of funny how even though Vicious and Enchanted exclude each other, Vicious and Vorpal exclude each other, but Enchanted and Vorpal don't exclude each other and can thus be rolled on the same weapon. Now then you of course have something like Keen, Critical Chance. Now Critical Chance has its entire own category, which means keen in of itself doesn't exclude anything else. And then you of course have things like keenly jacked, keenly empowered. These are all procs as well. So with that said, let's take a look at some of the legendary bows. So essentially what I've done is I've looked through every single high tier bow on newworld.db. The first thing I've done is I've excluded every single legendary bow that doesn't have a combination of dexterity and constitution, because there's quite a few that have like weird stat combinations, and essentially they're nonsensical as a weapon. So what I've done is I've included most of the bows with pure dexterity. I did exclude a couple that were just terrible in every other conceivable way. I've also included a few that had a combination of dexterity and constitution, simply because you can always adjust your character's stats to fit that, assuming you're not running 100% dex and 0 con, then you can always just do that adjustment. And then I've included a couple of other interesting mentions that aren't necessarily legendary bows, and I've put them into a few categories here in terms of how to actually obtain them. Now, starting out, we have Torrent. Now, for the longest time, this was probably the single most used bow. This is, of course, the legendary weapon quest that you get once you actually reach level 20 with the bow and you completed a bunch of different side missions in, I believe, Eden Grove or Shattered Mountain. Then this quest is going to be unlocked, called Blessing the Rains, in which you have to kill a bunch of elites all over the world, and that's sort of the easiest way once you hit level 60 to get your first higher tier weapon, a 580 gear score Torrent. Now, this is not a fantastic bow. It has empowering splinter shot, which is not one of the abilities you're going to be using. Extra damage to corrupted, not fantastic either, and you can of course always just put in a different gem. But it's at least pure dex, so it's a decent first bow when you reach level 60. Up next, we have a little bit of an interesting bow here called the Regent's Bow. Now, this is a bit of a special one, and it's unfortunately not legendary in the current version of the game, and it hasn't been since game release, but in the beta, this used to be a legendary bow. Currently, it's only gonna drop as a purple, and the reason you want it is really quite simple. It has luck, and you can replace this gem with a pearl, so that's a double luck bow, and luck is one of those perks that you can't actually apply to a crafted bow yourself. So the only way to obtain a luck bow is to find one. Now, actually obtaining this not so great bow, because intelligence and dex not the best, it's not going to have mortal lifesteal, I believe. I seem to recall that that's the perk that gets excluded, so it's going to have luck and energizing evade shot, which is not great either, but it is really easy to obtain simply by following a quest line in Reekwater. You're going to end up with this quest called The Queen is Dead Elite, in which you essentially have to clear out the entire pirate fortress. You have to kill all of the different bosses, and then eventually you have to do the arena in which you kill the Siren Queen, which is probably the single easiest of all the arenas, so it's actually not that difficult. Now, that's going to allow you to have this bow, which again is going to be a purple, but it's going to be a good luck piece that you can use for dungeons and such. Moving on, we got Patience. Now, Patience is another luck bow with 2.8%, and this one can actually drop as a legendary, but it's quite a bit harder to get. Now again, it's not a fantastic bow either. Energizing evade shot, not the best. Vorpal, pretty good. So it is definitely better than the first one, but it's also harder to obtain, since it only drops in the Spriggan reward chest. Now, the Spriggan reward chest is in fact the chest you get for completing the Munitius Tuning Orb, aka the arena in Eden Grove, which is the single hardest of all of the arenas in the game currently. That being said, doing the arena is not a guarantee. This is not a quest item that you get. It has to drop from the chest, and the chest has a lot of other drops. So there's no guarantees here. You might even get it, but not as a legendary if your expertise isn't high enough, and even if it is, you still might get it as a non-legendary. So this one's quite hard to farm, but I thought it was a worthy mention nonetheless. Then we move into another category. Then we move into a different category. Now, these next couple of... Then we move into a different category. Now, these next couple of bows are not the best you can get, but they're also obtainable out in the world as random drops. In other words, they're pure dex, pretty much all of them. As you can see here, this one has accuracy, not that great. Ancient Bane, not that great. And Chain Lightning, that's okay for PvE, right? Not a fantastic bow, but not a terrible one either. And here you can see gathered from, essentially, supply chests, supply stockpiles, dropped by black alligators, and all sorts of minions, right? So anything that's above level 59 essentially is going to be an area in which this is a potential drop, and potentially as a legendary. if your expertise level on the bow, of course, is high enough. The same can be said for this next one, Blind Justice, Keen Speed, Refreshing Move, Ancient Bane. So this one is a little bit better, because it has Refreshing Move, which is a really good proc that you can only get on the weapon itself, and it's definitely one of the stronger procs in my opinion. It's a pure dex piece, and again, it drops from 59 plus. Then we have the Bow of the Woods Demon. That's a cool ass name. Unfortunately, it's not very good either, so I'm pretty much going to stop talking about it now, but again, it drops in the same manner. Then we have Fate's Design. Similar situation. Not that great perks, but possible legendary, 30 dex. Drops, as you can see here, from a bunch of level 57 plus. So slightly easier to get, I guess. Then we get to Gilded Recurve. Now, Gilded Recurve has an interesting combo of Constitution and Dex, Refreshing, Mortal Energy, and Penetrating Rapid Shot. Again, not fantastic. 59 plus areas, this can drop. But I'm gonna stop talking about this bow now, because again, it's not that interesting. Next up, we have the Dragon Breath Spo. Now, this one I kinda liked. It looks super cool. It's probably one of the coolest looking bows. Like, I really like the red finish. But the truth is, it's not that amazing either. It has Enchanted, which is really, really good. So it does have one really strong perk, and then it has a proc, Chainfire, which is not terrible either. So it's definitely better than what we've been looking at so far. And then Mortal Fortification, again, not what you're looking for. This is another random drop that can essentially drop anywhere. That's level 59 plus. Up next, we got the Slayer's Crossbow. Now, the Slayer's Crossbow is a bit of a conundrum. Now, it looks really cool, and on paper here, if you see, Lifesteal, Vicious, and Vorpal. That's not bad, okay? Like, I'm aware that Lifesteal isn't technically what you're looking for the most on a bow, but it's by no means bad either. Like, there are way worse procs you can get than Lifesteal. In my opinion, it's better than Chain Lightning, it's better than any of the chain things. And on top of that, you have both critical damage and headshot damage, and a headshot on the bow is a critical hit, which means your headshots are gonna deal insane amounts of damage. And keep in mind, these two are not supposed to be able to be on the same item. They exclude each other, but because it's a named legendary drop, they don't exclude each other in this particular case. But there's a problem. I mentioned a conundrum, so what is this conundrum of which I'm talking? It only drops from Slayer Rosellen. Now, why does that make it a conundrum? Well, if you see here, Slayer Rosellen resides in the northern part of Ebenskiller Reach, and he is a level 60. Why is that a problem? Well, that's a problem because as a level 60, he should be incapable of actually dropping this as an actual legendary. Yep, I know, sad. I was sad too. I had to re-record this part about it because I actually didn't realize until I was saying it and looked, wait, level 60? Wait a second, does that mean? That must mean you can't. Hold on a second. And then I went in here to read some of the comments, and it does not appear like anyone has actually been able to get it in a 600 version. So yeah, don't think that's possible yet. Moving on, we have what is probably your easiest bet for actually obtaining a pretty strong legendary bow. It's not perfect, but it is very strong. It was my first legendary bow, and essentially all you need to get Warpwood is to get 200 engineering. Easy. It's a pure dex piece, empty gem socket, enfeebling poison shot. Now, enfeebling poison shot is one of the ability perks that you do want to have as a bow user in PvP, but also you don't really want to have it on the bow. Now, the reason you don't want to have it on the bow is because there are plenty of good things you can get on your weapons that you can't get on your armor, right? But enfeebling poison shot, the ability perks essentially, they're rollable both on the weapon and on the armor. Right, so they're better to have on the armor, leaving more room for the stronger perks on the actual weapon. So it's not perfect, but it also has Vorpal, which is really good, and Keenly Jacked, which is one of the best procs in the game. Again, this is essentially 70% added damage to your critical hit, although over a time period of 10 seconds, but nonetheless, it's 170% of your critical hit damage in total, so Keenly Jacked is also really, really good. Okay, make no mistake, really, really good. Now, again, as I said, the way to obtain this is essentially to get 200 engineering, and then you have to obtain this item called an enchanted bowstring in order to see the recipe. Then you just need 20 glittering ebony, 15 phoenix weave, 5 runic leather, a splintered bow, 4 wildwood, and 2 blister weave. It's honestly not that expensive to make. Comparatively, at least, this is not that bad. And again, you know what you're gonna get. That's the great thing about these named legendaries when you craft them, is that you put in the materials and you already know what the outcome is. No rolling, no fails. You just get exactly what you're paying for. So I've been using this bow for quite some time, but I'm looking for a different one. Because now we're stepping into dungeon territory. Now, dungeon territory, first up we got Creeping Recurve. Now, I actually have this bow in a legendary form, albeit with a different gem. This one drops in Genesis, I believe, from 𝒮𝔴𝔞𝔤𝔢𝔯𝒮𝔮𝔲𝔞𝔄, which is the first boss in Genesis and one of the easy ones. As you can see here, he's the guy right in the beginning in the nursery. Pretty easy to kill. It's not perfect, but again, it's by no means bad. It has keen, crit chance, it has 𝒮𝔞𝔤𝔤𝔢𝔯𝒮𝔮𝔲𝔞𝔄, it has proc, and it has chain nature. That's another proc, which of course shouldn't be possible, but again, it's a named legendary, so there's an exception here. And it's a pure dex piece. It's a decent bow. I'm not a huge fan of chain nature, which is why I'm actually using warpwood. I favor warpwood over this Creeping Recurve. Also, it just looks cooler. But in any case, it's not a bad drop. It's not a bad bow. It definitely has at least 2 out of 3 really strong perks. Even 2 that actually synergize crit chance and 𝒮𝔞𝔤𝔤𝔢𝔯𝒮𝔮𝔲𝔞. Moving on to the 2 best bows in the game, currently in my opinion. Both of them are Lazarus drops, and they each drop from a different boss in Lazarus. Now this is the single best cooldown reduction bow in the game. What I mean by that is, it has refreshing move, light and heavy attacks reduce your active weapon cooldowns by 2.8%, and it also has refreshing, which is just a fixed 2.8% cooldown reduction, and then it has enchanted, which is one of the best perks in the game. Light and heavy attacks deal 9.6% more damage, and this all combines to one hell of a strong bow. Now specifically, this bow drops from 𝒮𝔮𝔲𝔞𝔤𝔄𝔄𝔄𝔄𝔄𝔄𝔄𝔄𝔄𝔄𝔄𝔄𝔄𝔄𝔄𝔄𝔄𝔄𝔄𝔄𝔄𝔄𝔄𝔄𝔄𝔄𝔄𝔄𝔄𝔄𝔄𝔄𝔄𝔄𝔄𝔄𝔄𝔄𝔄𝔄𝔄𝔄𝔄𝔄𝔄𝔄𝔄𝔄𝔄𝔄𝔄𝔄𝔄𝔄𝔄𝔄𝔄𝔄𝔄𝔄𝔄𝔄𝔄𝔄𝔄𝔄𝔄𝔄𝔄𝔄𝔄𝔄𝔄𝔄𝔄𝔄𝔄𝔄𝔄𝔄𝔄𝔄𝔄𝔄𝔄𝔄𝔄𝔄𝔄𝔄 then moving on, we got the Lazarus Bone. Now the Lazarus Bone is special for a number of reasons. First of all, it only gives you 25 dex. Now it's the single only 600 gear score bow in the game that only gives you 25 of your stat. And I think it's because the devs looked at this bow and was like, this is too OP, this is too broken, we need to nerf it somehow without changing any of the perks. Okay, let's reduce the amount of dexterity it gives you. So it's a trade-off, but let's take a look. Crit chance, crit damage, and enchanted. That is insane. Now these two perks, crit damage and enchanted, are also supposed to sort of eliminate each other. Like you are not supposed to have a bow with both of them. All in all, I think it's worth it for 5 dex. Like 5 dex isn't that important at this point. Like when it's the difference between 340 or 345 dex, who cares really? Like honestly, that's not even 5 damage, right? So having the right perks here are just so much more important. And in my opinion, this is the single best bow in the game. Although the other one, Inherent Truths, is pretty close, but I think this one does top it. And so this is an absolute S+ tier, and it only drops from 𝒮𝔞𝔤𝔢𝔯𝔞𝔡, aka the bitch boss, as I like to call her. That's the halfway point boss with the big blue AoE. And yeah, those are pretty much your options. Anyways, I hope you guys learned something new. If you guys have any comments, questions, or suggestions, feel free to leave them down in a comment below. I hope you enjoyed the video, and as always, I love you guys. Stay awesome. Peace out.